You have progressive friends getting excited over Angela Rayner's appointment. Is there anything to get excited over as her background virtue signalling? I think it's good that we have somebody who was a carer and a trade union shop steward as Deputy Prime Minister, right? I think that's a good thing. But unlike Prescott, Angela Rayner actually has a real department that she's in charge of. Like, she's actually the Minister for Levelling Up Housing and Communities. But it does feel like, from what I've heard from Vicky Spratt's communication with the department, that most of the work is being done by Matthew Pennycook and not by Angela Rayner. So I'm not sure how much of a handle that she'll actually have on the Levelling Up department. I think it's good that Angela Rayner is in the position that she's in. Having somebody who's essentially been a mum at 16, who's worked like a proper pink-collar career, who's come up through the trade union movements, is something that is absolutely to be lauded. It's laudable that she's even there in the first place. But you got to remember, right, I posted about this on Twitter, let me find it. Somebody posted there was a thread on Twitter where somebody said here that Labour aren't relatable because all of their front bench, right, went to prestigious universities like Oxford, Cambridge and Harvard. And like, of course, this is a reasonable criticism. Even though obviously university education is easier to come by nowadays, all of them coming from Oxbridge, is this representative of the country? Of course it isn't. This isn't representative, right? This is not a terrible criticism. It's not the criticism I would make, though. But then you actually ask these people who say, oh, well, you want to have working class representation, do you? Actually ask them about Angela Rayner, who got part-time at Stockport College, and then they just insult them for being common, essentially. They ask for working class representation, and then when they get working class representation, they fucking belittle it and take the piss out of it and are just classist against her because she's working class and a woman. It's completely nonsensical. It's really, really gross. Yeah, absolutely. Again, no matter how much I despise Angela Rayner for her politics, I will always defend from classism. The same way that I hate Rishi Sunak's politics, but I'll defend him from racism coming from Reform UK supporters or whatever. But the real problem here, of course, is that lots of these people who went to Oxford and Cambridge here, like you look at Streeting, you look at Jonathan Reynolds as well. Like, lots of these people didn't come from like incredibly privileged upbringings. Starmer's dad was a filmmaker, but the privileged upbringing or not isn't relevant to me. That's not relevant to me, where they've come from and what their parents did. All this banging on about what people's parents did, oh, my dad was a toolmaker, my mum was a nurse, blah, 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 I come from an NHS family, is irrelevant as to what these people have actually done with their own lives. Class, to me, isn't actually about what your parents did or what house you grew up in. It's about, again, your relationship to production. It's about your personal level of income and wealth. And what actually the problem is here, what the real problem is here, is the actual jobs these people have done. We take all those same people mentioned in the original tweet. Keir Starmer was a lawyer, Riggs a Bank of England economist, Cooper, Miliband, Liz Kendall, all political advisors, Mahmood and David Lammy both lawyers. Streeting was a consultant for PricewaterhouseCoopers. None of these people have ever done like a real job. It's not like Kate Osborne MP, who was a postie, or John Trickett, who was a plumber, or Mick Whitley, or even Carla Denyer, who was an engineer. So was Sean Berry. Not even people who came from the trade union movement. Like John McDonnell was a trade union researcher, for example. Yet when the Labour right get in charge, it's just political advisors, but people who've only lived being advisors and spads, or people who've been lawyers, right? Nothing wrong with being a lawyer. Nothing wrong with that at all. In fact, having a lawyer in is really important. You need to appoint people like justice secretaries and attorney generals. But should they be occupying like a third of the positions of the major parts of the front bench? No, of course they shouldn't be. And yet, Angela Rayner, a carer and a union steward, she's the only one there who's had a real job. They've had people who've gone through charities, which is more respectable, but no one's been on the bottom rung. No one's had to live on like below the median income in the way that Angela Rayner has had to. And that's the problem here. But the key part of this really is she's not appointed to this position. All of these people, right? All of these people are appointed to the front bench by the Starmer Politburo. She is only there. The only reason they have a normal person with a normal job sitting as the Deputy Prime Minister is because she was elected. She was elected by the Labour members to be the deputy leader of the Labour Party. They can't get rid of her. Everybody else, that they actually select themselves, all from their same background of people in professional jobs. That's it. And that's why, I won't have respect for her politics. But I will always at least respect the fact that someone of her background has made it in politics. The thing is, like, class discourse in this country is, like, turbo-fucked. So this person who came up on my feed on TikTok, she talked in one of her videos about the whole Angela Rayner classism stuff. Let's have a listen.
There's been a noticeable rise in hatred aimed at Angela Rayner in recent weeks, but particularly since Angela, a woman of working class background, became Deputy Prime Minister in a Labour-led government. In every hate-filled comment I've seen across socials, I've not seen any negative response to her work as a member of the Labour Party, but towards her as an individual, concentrating on how she looks, what she wears, how she sounds, and digs at her intelligence. This person believes that a woman who has worked her way to becoming Deputy Prime Minister is thick. And when his tweet gained momentum and the majority of the engagement were people disagreeing with him, he went on the defensive more by talking about her lack of GCSEs. And when it was pointed out that 2 male billionaires didn't achieve many grades at school, he said, "What did Angela achieve before politics?" I mean, it's a quick Google search, mate, but in a nutshell, Angela has achieved an invaluable career in the care sector, representing her colleagues, mostly women, as a union rep, and working her way up through Unison, where she continued to speak up for people's rights. And, most importantly, has been a solo parent as a teenager, the hardest.
And again, right, as I say, woman of working class background is a funny phrase, because at the end of the day, I don't give a shit about your background. I care about the jobs that you did. I care about your relationship to production. And as a carer, that is a career in which you're not professional, you've not been able to accrue assets, for example. She is somebody who's had to essentially live off of below median wage whilst working and renting for the entirety of her adult life up until becoming a politician, like an elected politician, which was in 2015. That's a level of real life experience that loads of people don't have. If you then go to university and then become a lawyer, you've instantly transformed your relationship to production, as far as I'm concerned. Now, of course, all of the points that she makes are absolutely correct, but somebody in the replies to this post decided to call this person out, apparently, right, because of the way that she made this comment. She didn't even sound particularly like middle class to me, but apparently they've intuited, just from the fact that she made this TikTok, that somehow that means she's middle class. This was her response.
I don't really know why there's this perception across social media, because I have other accounts as well, that I'm a middle class person, and I've got middle class friends, so I've nothing against people being from a middle class background. But I'm wondering, is it my accent? Is it my voice? Is it because I'm from the south of England? I don't know. I'm literally right now sitting in my council flat, filling out my application form to go back to my job as a support worker, wearing completely pre-loved clothing. Not that that's because I can't buy my own clothes. In fact, actually, that's just because I enjoy wearing pre-loved clothing. But I just don't get it. The only thing I can think of is that it's my accent.
And that's how, completely screwed up the discourse. In this TikTok, the same person said, "Oh, well, you called them pre-loved rather than second-hand. Therefore, that proves you're middle class." Now, that doesn't make any fucking sense either. Again, we've become completely detached from how we discuss class in this country, because it's all for one generation, right? It's all affect. It's all a bunch of kind of cultural trappings. It's all a bunch of ways in which that something is manifested socially outside of the actual driver of class, which is your relationship to production and your material wealth. Now, this person is a support worker. That's a working class job, right? It's pink collar. To be a support worker is a pink collar job. There's nothing middle class about being a support worker, especially if you live in a council flat. Not that that should make any difference. People of all classes should have access to council flats if we'd have properly built them and not sold them off. But that's a conversation for another time. All the judgment has been here is that you said pre-loved and you have an accent or what kind of house that you might live in, and another way in which kind of class is stupid in this country. Because again, it's all about, if you work, if you sell your labour for a wage, you are low on assets. Asset ownership is really what makes you middle class, right? Owning assets, making some income from assets, even if you don't make all of them and you still work. And if you sell your labour for a wage, you're a member of the proletariat. It's as simple as that. And in the modern era, in new generations that have come through, modernization has kind of broken down previous class hierarchies in the way that it never previously had. The ways in which kind of demographic change has moved people out of certain communities. The demise of council housing has meant that everyone has to get private rented accommodation nowadays, regardless of what background you come from, regardless of what job you have. So these communities have mixed. So the cultural and social divisions you'd have around class have kind of melted away. And since the property ownership has become this big divisor between generations of people, and property ownership for every single class amongst younger people is kind of broken down, this relationship between property wealth, asset ownership and class, that's also kind of broken down too. There's no kind of aspirational class in the same way, because they're all living in the same kind of accommodation, the same kind of communities which have mixed together, especially since more people have gone to university and more people have moved into inner cities to be able to find jobs post deindustrialization. And young people find a lot of camaraderie over that. Globalization is another big cause of this too. The kind of luxury commodities that would define a middle class existence 40 years ago. Post-globalization, these are all dirt cheap. It's why you hear stuff like, oh, well, you can afford avocado toast. I'm like, yeah, avocados are 50p a little. They're not expensive. They're not a luxury item anymore. And that's because of the way in which globalization has changed the ways in which we buy commodities in society. And then nothing is more stupid in the way in which we actually talk about class in this country than the NRS social grading system. Let me bring it up. So I'm sure you will have seen in people discussing election results and demographic breakdown, the idea of an NRS social grade, so the National Readership Survey, created an A through E grading system in how people can be divided in class lines. So A and B make sense, managerial roles and professional roles and intermediate and higher, right, these make sense. Although to be fair, in the B class, teachers are included in this and they earn below the median wage. So it's already kind of screwy. But then you get down to here, where what they've got is this division between manual workers and non-manual workers between C1, which is lower middle class, and these are like upper working class and working class, right? The divider on this isn't about your relationship to production. The divider isn't how much money you own, how much wealth you have, what your income is. The divider is just, are you a manual worker or not? Which makes no sense. It makes no sense in a modern service economy, how these social grades work. No sense whatsoever. A skilled manual worker, an aeronautical engineer, is considered C2. I worked in a call centre for 6 years, right? I'm fucking C1. I'm apparently of a higher class in society than an aeronautical engineer. This doesn't make any sense at all. This makes literally no sense whatsoever. So you'll see breakdowns in how people voted and saying, oh, well, in this certain C2DE demographic, certain party did badly. And whilst to be sure, unskilled manual workers like cleaners, for example, will all be part of the lower demographics too. It's not imperfect totally, but it's also not perfect either. This is in no way an accurate representation of a service economy. This was created over half a century ago originally, so it's completely out of date for a modern service economy and how we discuss people's relationship socially to each other, especially since those grades have broken down post-globalization, post-university boom, and post the sell-off of council houses. What also screws this up as well is that pensioners in this whole demographic here, they don't all go into E, they only go into E if they just own the state pension. If they have a private pension, or indeed they belong to a higher grade and are just on the state pension, they go into those categories too. People were looking, for example, at the election results in 2017 and 2019. They would look at the result breakdown and say, oh, well, actually, you look at C2 and D, like the manual workers, like the true working class, quote unquote, because they work manually. They went away from Labour. When actually they didn't. If you only break it down between working age people all voted plurality Labour across all these demographics. It's only the retired that didn't vote Labour. The real divider was age, not occupation, not social grade upon what NRS says. If you do it by income, Labour support decreases the more rich people get across income. But when you break it down by this weird social class system, it was more even than it was stratified by income. And the reason for this is that if you were somebody, even if you grew up working in a factory, for example, you'd be D. If you then retired on a state pension, or even a defined benefit pension, lots of skilled manual workers and unskilled manual workers, before they got replaced by defined contribution schemes, would have got defined benefit or final salary pensions. So they would be getting a state pension protected by a triple lock, so inflationary pressures were completely irrelevant because their pension rose either with inflation or indeed the next year it rose above inflation because it rose with wage increases over that period. So pensioners were completely insulated from most of the cost of living crisis. They would be voting Conservative because they have no need to vote for a party that protects workers' rights because they don't work anymore. That's a different relationship to production, which is far more important when you want to learn how people vote. The reason why I wanted to talk about this is that the reason why I believe that my Marxian view of class has more actual utility as a measurement than this kind of system about what the way in which you work rather than the income that you have or your relationship to production is because I believe it tells you more about how people vote and what people's material interests are. And I also believe that the retired should be a completely separate category as well. Because what the retired rely on is just pensions. It's just pensions, that's it. The kind of work that they used to do, they don't have to care about what benefits that gets, because they're not going to be a receiver of those benefits of demand-side labour market reform that increases wages. They're not going to be somebody who benefits from that. And they may have had a lot of class differences in terms of social class with like the labour leadership, but really and truly it was a difference in material interest. Workers broadly across the economy, the information shows us, I mentioned it on stream the other day, the information broadly shows that labour were supported by people who were of working age. It was the retired that voted differently, and it's because they have a different set of material interests. Except they were treated as being manual workers, for example, in this social grade system and in the electoral demographics, because that's what they did when they worked, rather than, what their actual material relationship to how the government creates policy. If you want to create a policy, you want to look at who it materially affects, not what kind of social grouping your person belongs to and how that culturally affects what they perceive to be good policy. That's not a good way of discussing how policy is affected. If you've done it my way, you have clear demarcations between this policy affects this group because of this material reason. You don't get that from this system. You don't get it at all. And on top of that, a lot of these things make no sense. As I said, like, me working in a call centre is apparently of a higher class than an aeronautical engineer. Yeah, this is just vibes-based class. It's vibe-based class, just the same as that girl we were watching before, talking about Angela Rayner. It's just like how they only called her middle class because of her vibes. She gave them middle-class vibes because she called clothing pre-loved rather than second-hand. That's it, which is pure vibes. No discussion of material interest, material analysis, relationship to production whatsoever. And this is a difference between older generations and younger generations. This is why we have to really be pushing Marxian analysis onto future generations, because the reason why they're doing badly, the reason why younger generations are poor, are material in nature. They're not social in nature. There's no social reason as to why you are poorer if you are younger in this country. That's a material relationship. It's a relationship to production, a relationship to property. The reason why a lot of younger people are poorer is because a lot of older people have all of the property. They bought the houses. They got the houses from right to buy. Young people don't have council housing. And on top of that, older generations had more access to things like buy-to-let mortgages. Thanks, Blair. Appreciate you for that one. So not only do they get extra property wealth from right to buy and from the privatisation of housing, they got additional property wealth on top of that by becoming landlords. Now, this isn't, of course, all older generations. It's not all boomers. I'm not trying to say this is applicable to everybody. Clearly it isn't. But in terms of broader demographic trends, who had access to these and who didn't, older people did have access, younger people did not. And we should be forging alliances with people. Why should we perceive ourselves to be different from a cleaner who would be here, from a call centre worker who'd be here, from a teacher who'd be here? Why should we perceive ourselves to be different when we all have the same material interest? We all have a material interest in our wages going up, in public services being better, in the rich being taxed and our economy being more equal, the division between capital and labour being reduced. Thatcher was an extremely clever politician in terms of breaking the economic model, and through policies like right to buy, more of the lower income voted Conservative. Well, exactly, 100%. If anything, Thatcher was the most successful Marxist of all time. She truly believed that the base influenced the superstructure, that you created right-wingers by changing the material conditions of the people, by fomenting viewpoints based by changing people's material conditions. She was truly a Marxian in terms of the way that she analysed economics. The initial quote from her was, "The method is economics, but the goal is to change the soul," and she created a legion of people who had property to protect and whose material interests shaped their political viewpoints. Because not only does property ownership make you more right-wing in terms of your economic interest, also your social interests as well. If you want to protect the status quo, you're going to be more authoritarian in terms of policy. You prefer crackdowns on antisocial behaviour. You don't want there to be an upending of social hierarchy by having people who look different from you or who act different from you. You'll become more protective of what you have and scared of social change if you have something to lose. And while we should absolutely be sceptical of large-scale social change, because we should always be at least somewhat wary of causing upheaval with negative utility, that shouldn't preclude us from making positive social change just because people with property are scared that it might be bad. And that's what we've had for the last 25 years, a single class of property owners dictating policy for everybody else. But that's breaking down and is unlikely to change going forward as millennials become a bigger electoral force. But it's also going to change how we view class. Hey there, if you enjoyed the video, make sure that you like and leave a comment. That helps the video out in the algorithm. If you subscribe and ring the bell, it'll let you know when I go live. I stream every day on YouTube and Twitch. You can also follow all of my socials down in the description. And if you want to support me in a more financial manner, there's a join button for memberships. It's just 99p to be a member on YouTube, as well as a Patreon, and there's some merch there as well. And hopefully I'll catch you on the next video. Take care.